Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. Thanks for joining us in advance today. If you want to improve, stay tuned and find out what you need to improve. Thanks for being with us today, and we are going to improve something today, but let's see who's going to be here with me to improve this. I'm Doris, and also we have with us today...
Hi, everyone. This is Pauline.
Pauline, do you need to improve anything?
Oh, lots of things, Doris.
Improving is important, and who else is with us today?
It's Dave. Good to see you.
And Dave, are you going to try to improve things?
I don't really know that I need to improve anything.
Dave,
I think he's joking.
Yeah, I have a lot to improve.
Right. Well, we all do, But we can improve a lot of things. But that doesn't mean that we need to be discouraged. It just means that we try to make something a little better, don't you think? Mm-hmm. And what are we going to try to improve right now?
Well, today we're talking about improving your writing.
Mm-hmm. Good. And we're going to improve what we write. And sometimes you write articles, but sometimes you just write emails or whatever you write. It's good to improve and make it clearer and easier, don't you think?
That's right. We all do a lot of writing. I think most of us do anyway, so it's good to think about how we can get better at that.
Okay, so if you have a magazine, open it up to page 40 today. And this topic says if you want to write really, really well, and here's great advice from an expert. Now, a lot of people give you advice, but it's just their opinion. But what's the difference when you get it from an expert?
Well, when you get it from an expert, then you have all of their experience and all of their skills that you're able to learn from.
So it sounds pretty interesting, doesn't it?
All right, yeah, sounds good to me.
So where are we going to start today?
Well, I think we should probably start at the beginning. What do you think?
The very beginning?
No.
Shall we read it first?
Let's read through the first tip. How about?
Okay, and read through to the number 1. We'll finish that, and we'll go to the second column. Are you all ready to read?
All ready.
Read out loud with us if you want to. Here we go.
Improve your writing. Want to write really, really well? Here is great advice from an expert. Writing well isn't easy. In fact, it's hard work, said William Zinsser, author of On Writing Well, the Classic Guide to Writing Nonfiction. A clear sentence is no accident. Very few sentences come out right the first time or even the third time. If you find that writing is hard, it's because it is hard. But just because writing is, hard, that doesn't mean you can't use techniques to make writing a little easier. For inspiration, I turned to my colleague Jane Shannon, who was my co-author on the Definitive Guide to HR Communication. Here is Shannon's advice on how to improve your writing in 9 simple steps. 1. Read The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. If you haven't read it, do so. As co-author William Strunk Jr. wrote, vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph no unnecessary sentences, for the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines, and a machine no unnecessary parts.
Well, the first sentence is really interesting. It says, writing well isn't easy. Do you agree?
Oh, of course. I mean, writing might be easy once you learn how to do it. If you watch kids learning how to write, you realize just writing at all isn't easy. But then, communicating well, learning how to communicate, I think, is a lifelong skill that we have to constantly improve at.
Pauline, do you have to write anything usually?
Well, actually, yes, Doris. For my job here, I usually write a lot of the speaking parts for Let's Talk in English. When me and Peter are on Let's Talk in English, I write a lot of those conversations. And then sometimes I get to write a few articles here and there, too.
So we have to write. Well, and I'm sure that you have, Dave, you have to do a lot of writing, don't you?
I do. Sometimes I write your wonderful introductions where everyone gets to
nice.
see you
Thank
giving
you.
an address to the readers. I also write the review skits for some of these articles. And I like to write some poetry and stories on my own as well.
Well, in case you notice it, there's a little QR code here at the top. It says Topic Talks, and actually Dave writes a lot of that.
They're a lot of fun. I'm always excited when I get to be in those. He writes some fun stuff.
Right. So if you want to
She's
see
a
some
great
of
actress.
Dave's writing, just put your little phone on there and check that out. Some people don't know what that's for.
Exactly.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. You can
So be
check
sure
out a
and
lot of
watch
our
it.
stuff through that.
Because we don't have a TV show for advance, but you can watch on your phone just the same. Isn't
That's
that-
right. And Doris, you're quite the expert writer yourself.
Not really an expert, but I like to write. Sometimes I write stories and adventure stories, but I like to write poems and songs too. Sometimes the Let's Talk songs, I write those.
I was thinking of that. I was thinking a lot of people may not know that you write those songs. I always enjoy hearing
Don't
those.
tell them,
It's too late. Everyone knows.
Oh, no, they don't. But, it isn't very easy. It could be hard work, but the people have written a lot of books about it. And when they say down here in line 12 that a clear sentence isn't like an accident. In other words, the first time you write it, it might not be the way you really think it's clear enough. Do you find that true? When you write it, you say, well, I better rewrite that a little.
Actually, this weekend I was writing for my blog, and I just kept rewriting a section because I couldn't quite get it clear enough. It can be really hard to express what you want. You know in your head the idea that you want to communicate, but it's hard to get it in a short, clear way that makes sense to the people reading it.
Right. And even though it's a little bit difficult, but you can still use certain techniques. There's certain things you can do to make it easier. So let's find out what they are. That's what we're going to try to talk about for today and tomorrow, right? Mm-hmm. Some techniques, right?
Yeah, and one of those techniques is to read a book called The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. I do remember reading this book when I was in 6th grade, I think, and I thought it was very, very, very helpful.
That's really interesting. I've never heard of this book. I'll have to look it up. Although we should mention that all of these tips that we're going to talk about today and tomorrow come from another book, and it's the book, The Definitive Guide to HR Communication. And that's what we are taking our tips from today. HR is short for human resources, and it's a department in a business that works with employees. They'll probably write the training manuals. They'll send out emails to let employees know new things that are happening in the company. So
And
they're
they make
always
contracts,
writing.
too.
You're right. They write contracts. So they really need to learn how to communicate very clearly and precisely. So that's her focus. But like you were saying before, Doris, a lot of these tips are helpful for any kind of writing.
That's true, right. Well, it says here in the second column, you should read this, The Elements of Style. I don't think I've read it. If I did, I might have forgotten. I've read so many books. But you remember reading that book?
Yeah. It just gave some really helpful kind of I think for a book like this can speak to writers who are writing any kind of thing, whether it's a paper that you're writing for school or whether you're doing some HR stuff. Thanks so much for bringing that up, Pauline, actually. Because that kind of gives us an idea of what the writer's focusing on when they write this article. But yeah, this book is really a helpful guide for just knowing how to use the tools of language. Because there are like having concise writing, not having unnecessary sentences, that's the kind of thing that might change depending upon what kind of writing you're doing, right? Creative writing
but you still have to be concise. I think this word concise is a good word to know. It kind of means that you have to focus on what you're talking about. Don't bring in too many things that have nothing to do with the subject.
For sure.
I think the opposite of concise is rambling.
Yeah, that's right.
Sometimes I know when I just talk with friends, sometimes I ramble. It just means you talk, and it's not very clear what you're talking about. You're kind of like, you have one idea and then that reminds you of something else, and then you tell you something else, and then you forgot the story you were originally telling. And that's kind of okay if you're just talking with friends, but you don't want to be writing things that way. You're going to lose people's attention. They're not going to understand what you're talking about.
Well, that's true, Pauline. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that people that are speakers should also do the same thing. Sometimes they bring in all kinds of things that has nothing to do with the topic. And I think they need to speak concisely too, don't you think, as well as write?
Yeah, I think we've all sat through speeches that seemed like they were rambling and not very concise.
That's right, yeah. But if you really want to have really good, strong writing, vigorous, means with, something that will affect people. If you ramble on and say, what were they talking about? So if you're kind of more concise, then you don't want too many unnecessary words. And it's just like it says here that, if you're going to draw a picture, you don't want a lot of extra lines in it. And if you make a machine that does something, you don't want a whole bunch of extra things on it. You just want the things you need. That's kind of an interesting way to compare it, isn't it?
Yeah, I really liked that machine analogy. With the painting, I thought, well, I guess it depends on the style of painting. Some very creative stuff has all sorts of extra lines and spots, and it kind of creates this effect. And it made me think, well, I guess, just like poetry or really creative writing, then they add a lot of extra words to give you a sense of things that you wouldn't have in a machine like writing. That's a HR memo or a contract or an informative article, right? So we have to keep that in mind. And
that's true.
If this is supposed to be a machine,
writing,
we need to make sure that all the pieces are necessary.
Right, and I think that's the thing. It depends on the kind of writing. Like, if you're writing poetry, then you still shouldn't be adding things that are unnecessary, but what's considered necessary or unnecessary is different, right?
Well, I think we can talk about it more about focusing and getting to the point. But I think what sometimes people do is we have a word in English is called digress, D-I-G-R-E-S.
Oh, that's a good word.
They get off the subject, and then they have to get back on the subject. And sometimes it's hard to get off and on the subject. So I think it's better to kind of stick to the subject as much as you can, don't you?
I do agree.
I think that's one good point. So you need to focus quite a bit. So that's the very first thing you can do is look it over and see if it's very concise. And if there's too many unnecessary things, cross them out. I do that if I'm going to write or I'm going to make a speech. I say, I don't need to say this. I don't need to write that. And go through and kind of edit it yourself. What do you think?
Josh and I have talked about that because we've both written for Studio Classroom articles, and we have a word limit. We can only write so many words. And we've talked about how it makes you a better writer because naturally you tend to write a little more rambling than is necessary, right? We tend to put in a lot. And then because we have a very strict guideline that says only need this many words, then you have to go back and be honest with yourself, like, oh, I guess this isn't really necessary. Oh, this
is nice,
word.
but I don't need it.
Exactly. And it really forces you to be more concise and think about what's really the focus, what's the most important information. And I think that kind of practice really does hone your skills and make you a better writer.
I think so. I think focusing, that's one of the important things. So remember that. Now, today we're going to probably just do two more. The first one was to focus, and the second and third one, let's read about those. We're on page 40 now, the second column, and start down there where it says, use the word you. Let's read the rest of today's lesson.
Two, use the word you. Shannon writes, first of all, using the word you immediately causes you to focus on your audience. An email that starts out, you have an important opportunity to help our company succeed, has a different impact than an email that begins, I want to share some thoughts I have on the success of the company. By identifying the benefit you're offering to the reader, and then working it into a sentence that begins with the word you, you'll be amazed how much stronger that makes your writing. 3. Create powerful headlines. Too many headlines are labels. Introduction, your benefits, departments, etc. Shannon's advice: instead of using labels, write a headline that highlights the most important concept you want the reader to know. That way, if the reader skims, which we all do, he or she will still have the information that matters.
So number 2 then is to use the word you to make it personal. Now, I wonder why that's important. What does it say here about that?
Well, when you use the word you, it immediately causes you to focus on your audience.
Okay.
So it gets people's attention, like, any kind of like persuasive email or like the example they have. You have an important opportunity to help your company succeed. Now, admittedly, personally, a lot of times if I get like a promotion or an ad that has a headline like that, I'm going to immediately delete it. But maybe that's just me. Yeah.
But it's also different. It's depending, like you said, if it's an advertisement. But if it's your company sending you an email and it says you're like, oh, me? What? What do they need from me? What do I need to do, right? So it's depending on the writing. I also it's not just about making the person who's reading it focus and realize it's for them. It also says as the writer, it causes you to focus on who you're writing to. As soon as if you start with a you, it makes you start to think, why does this person who's reading this need to read this? Why would they want to see this? What do I have to say to them?
Right.
And it kind of helps you focus too on who you're writing to.
That's true. Otherwise, if you just say, people do this or people do that, well, so what? You're one of those persons. But people,
our company is doing this thing. We are all, instead of saying, I want to talk to you about this thing that I think is important to you for this reason. Or
you're important, what you do for this company.
Yeah.
Instead of the people in our company, then it's not too personal.
Yeah.
Well, and they do another example too, right? Instead of saying I. So the first example with you is you have an important opportunity to help our company. She says has a very different feeling and impact than an email that says, I want to share some thoughts I have on the success of our company, right? It doesn't seem as much like, oh, I should definitely read this. This is written to me.
Right,
it's just somebody writing their thoughts out to everybody, just kind of sending it out to the whole company.
Well, it says here that it makes your writing stronger, so that's what it goes on to say here. And so that's one thing, is if you make it a little bit more relevant or focused on the person.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking, what you just said, that's the big piece I think that we can pull from here for any kind of writing. We were saying before, this might not apply to storytelling or songwriting or poems, but focusing on who your audience is and how is it going to be relevant to them? How are they going to interact with this? How are you going to make them want to read that? All of those thoughts and thinking about the person who's going to receive this thing you're writing, that's very important.
That's part of
focusing on the audience. I think that part applies to any type of writing.
Yeah, totally.
And I really kind of like the number 3 here because it says that you create some powerful headlines or something that, like when you're writing an article. Let's say we write this article and we got 1, 2, 3 and we mark it. But what if we just write the whole article and you don't know what we're talking about? But now we're focusing on this is point 1, this is 2, this is 3. And then people can see, oh yeah, this is about this subject. And I think this is very important, don't you think?
Yeah, I actually really like the bit about creating powerful headlines because I think that can be, we sort of talked about how it's like it creates landmarks, you know? So if you're reading through something and it's like the writer is wanting to take you through some process or through an explanation of some sort, having those headlines that really give you an idea of what the content is, gives you landmarks, helps you navigate through the piece, And it's also going to help people remember what you're talking about more. If you just give them a wall of text, right, just a bunch of writing, they're just, get overwhelmed. But when you break it up in clear sections and have those nice little powerful headlines, that you can look at that and say, oh, okay, that's what this is about. It helps you remember it. It helps you understand it. It's really helpful.
So if you just wrote a label, you would just say, things to know. You don't know what that is. But if you put down vacations, I want to know about my vacations. So that makes it a little bit more, I'm going to highlight this is about vacations instead of things to know. Well, I don't know if I want to know. But you say something I'm interested in, I'm going to read it.
That's a really good point. And it's interesting to think about, for a longer email, for example, for a business email, maybe to think about, should I be using headlines or doing more to break this up so that people who are skimming, I like how they say, which we all do, skimming is just, you're not reading every word, you're just kind of like quickly reading through the gist, right? The general idea of it. And the more we can break it into headlines or into numbers, the more likely people are going to catch the most important information if we organize it well.
Yeah, if we organize it well, that's really that's really kind of the defining thing, as long as it's organized well. And I'm glad you brought that up about skimming. That is something that we all do,
Yes,
it's a way of
we do speed reading.
Yeah, speed reading, right?
But if it's personal and we want to know about the vacation, we're going to watch it and see how many days we get. We better.
For sure.
We won't know.
That reminds me of when I was in college and we used to get the syllabus on the very first day. You go to all your classes and the teacher gives you the syllabus that will tell you like the rules for the class and maybe the major assignments that are going to come up. And I would always flip straight to the section that was like the absences policy to find out how many absences I could have in that class before they would dock my grade.
Yeah.
There would always be a headline for that. I'd read every word on that part.
Right. So something that's going to apply to affect you personally makes a big difference. That can be quite powerful. So like even when we write articles for the magazine, sometimes the people who write for us, they'll just write a nice article, but I say go through and mark a little headline for the paragraph so that when we read it, we can read this subject and that subject. I think it helps us in reading even the article. This article is much better now with all these subjects outlined, don't you think?
I really agree. Sometimes when I'm reading through really long articles that I'm editing for the Advanced magazine, I'm trying to figure out what is the main ideas or how are they trying to take us through this place or this concept that they have. And going through that as I'm figuring it out, that's how then I put the headlines on because I want other people not to have to do so much work. I want them to know, day one.
That's
or
right.
maybe they're organizing it in terms of days, or they're organizing it by places, food, and getting there. Or, there's different ways to organize a given topic, say like travel is the one I'm thinking of. But if you don't know how they're going to do it, you spend a lot of time reading just trying to figure out
what they're talking
what they're
about,
doing and what direction they're taking it.
Well, you want to know what the reader wants to know. So the highlights then are the most important thing that you want them to know. Safety in swimming or something like that, instead of saying going to the beach or something. So you have to say what it's about, and then you read the subject more. And I think that's true that when you write, you need to have this kind of headlines. Don't you think so?
Yeah. And I think even in creative writing also, just to kind of bridge it over, if you have a headline, maybe in that case it won't be so much about the information, but it'll be something that draws you in to want to know more about something that's going to happen next. I think in any case, powerful headlines can be applied to your writing.
And as you go through and read the article, then you can read it later, and you might read it more thoroughly the first time, but then when you go back and review it, then looking at the headlines will remind you of the content. So it's got a lot of uses, hasn't it?
Absolutely. I think it's a really good tip, especially for article writing, for me, for like doing blog posts. It's something for me to think about, maybe even for longer emails.
Right.
Definitely that kind of focused writing.
More paragraphs, but also underline, making a heading for them. Right. And so there's a lot of headings in this article. So today, what we've talked about then was improving whatever we write, and one of the things is focusing. That was very important. And what else did we say they have to remember? Review.
They have to remember to use the word you, right? To have kind of
personal.
Make it personal, make it more focused. And we also they also recommended that everyone read the book The Elements of Style by Strunk and White to give them some solid pointers, right, on how to use different tools of writing.
Yes, exactly. So that was all kind of within that first one, was reading that book and being more concise. And then number 2 was use the word you. And we talked about how for communications with staff, company emails, that kind of thing, using this word you was a really great idea for helping you focus on your audience and tell them what's important to them, why they should be reading this information. But then more generally, for those of us who do writing in other situations, just to think about who's going to be reading our content and how to make it personal to them and how to really help them realize why they should read it.
Well, and even in personal emails, it's not just business things, I think, and creating like a little headline and making people excited about what they're going to read. Then they can go back and read it later. So even if you skim through it, to skim through something just means to read it quickly. Now, you might read it more thoroughly the first time, but then you might skim through it later. I like to skim through old books or old lessons, and I don't read the whole book over again, but I look at some of the titles, and that reminds me of the subject. So skimming through something is good. I mean, but it's better to read it more thoroughly, but then you might skim through it later, right?
Yeah, skimming is one reading skill, and it's a reading skill that as a language learner you want to practice. You want to learn, you want to be able to do both. You want to be able to quickly skim through information to just grab the most important parts, and you also want to be able to do a deeper read and really collect all the minute details. Being able to do both is important, and providing a writing style that allows somebody to do both easily is also important.
Well, that's just the very beginning because there's only 3 of them, but we have more coming up altogether. We're going to have 9. So be sure you come back to hear the rest of them tomorrow and listen to the whole program. Don't skim through it. And we're glad you're here with us today. And Pauline and Dave, you'll be back tomorrow with me?
Promise.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll see you all as we talk about improving our writing. Have a good day today and write something. Write us a note sometime, too. Make it concise.
Yeah, you can send us some feedback on some of our articles, and maybe it'll get printed in our next issue.
So thanks for being our friend for life. We'll see you tomorrow.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.